Movies, bestsellers, and social media are circulating what has until recently been an inside interreligious conversation: hell. And Hellbound, the Kevin Miller documentary we just featured, popularizes the Bible's treatment of three main views on hell. Here are the scriptures on this from their work. Biblical evidence on all three views. There's the traditional, the eternal punishment view. There's the annihilationist. Poof, God takes care of you and you're gone. Or the universal reconciliationist view. God keeps working on you after you're gone. Well, there's a lot of context to be discovered on this topic of hell. Context to be found in Scripture, in church history, and our own personal histories. And to help us make sense of it, a Catholic and a Protestant guide. Reverend Will Ingram is senior pastor at St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Toronto, and Father Thomas Rosica is the communications advisor to the Pope and CEO of Salt and Light Media Foundation. Let's welcome them to Context. Thanks, guys. Will, thank you. Great to have you here. Father Tom, thank you. Wow, I am very glad that we've got two experts like you to tackle this, and I want to know first, what is hell trying to teach us? The existence that hell is there, what is it trying to teach us? Father Tom?
Let me just say two things, because it's a very vast topic. First thing, from the Catholic perspective, hell is never something imposed upon us by God. It's something chosen by human beings. It is not a place, a state. The fires are not, we don't know the intensity of the fires. We don't know about the devils and their red, the hats and pitchforks. We do know it's a state of alienation, of distancing, of loneliness, of separation from God. And the scriptures have given us some very clear signs or signals of what that separation could be.
Reverend Ingram, Will, what do you think hell is trying to teach us?
I'm not sure that hell is trying to teach us anything per se. I think instead what we need to ponder is, as Father Tom has indicated, that there are different perspectives, even biblically, about what hell is. There's the idea of eternal punishment with fire. There's the concept of an afterlife in which we do just are extinguished and so on. I think what is common to all of those things, though, is the idea of separation from God. I do think when it comes to issues of the afterlife, it is wise for us to embrace some degree of faithful agnosticism. We don't ultimately know, and whenever we try to claim a certainty about what we know exactly about the afterlife, I believe that's going too far. What hell is trying to teach us, therefore, I think is something about justice and about the holiness of God, and for some of us, the ultimate triumph of grace.
Father Tom, Luke 16, a passage where Jesus is speaking about hell, is eternal torment, punishment. It's got a rich man, a poor man. The rich man is in hell, in Gehenna. How do you interpret that, the idea that it's
I'm glad you mentioned, because
eternal?
it's one of the several graphic images of hell in the New Testament. It all boils down to unity, union with God, and separation from God, and separation from others. So, for example, with the story of the rich young man, Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher, says, "L'enfer, c'est les autres." Hell is other people. And it's not a place. Hell can be other people, but...
Present company excluded, of course.
Not us. Whenever I'm with you, Lorna, there's no hell, okay?
Okay.
But at the same time, Jesus is heaven and the way to heaven. Absolutely. And he shows us that God is heaven. Not in heaven, God is heaven, and shows us the way. Jesus shows us the way to the Father. That story of the rich young man, by choosing a life of separation, alienation, selfishness, egocentrism, he's choosing separation from God and from his brothers and sisters, his neighbors. Therefore, those graphic Semitic images that are used there, as well as the ones in the book of Revelation and other places in the New Testament, all boil down to not the graphics, the Hollywood theatrics of it all, but it boils down to separation from God and separation from one another.
And
yes, but the Catholic Church, if we can specialize in here, like historically, Augustine and then Dante really set the image for hell.
Right.
And these are, why do they have an interest in keeping those images going for so long? That's all we knew.
Well, for example, Dante, I love the Divine Comedy, and if you look at hell in the Divine Comedy, it's not fire, it's not the heat, it's coldness, it's the soul that's frozen and separated. And those are graphic images, because we really can't imagine what this could be. We're limited with our language and our
Yeah,
description.
Dante was trying to imagine what happens to bodies
And that's right.
and when they do move away from God.
Right.
Here in this life.
Exactly.
But Dante, I think it's also important to say that he was a man of his time as well, and many of those great works of art that depict hell had a cartoonish dimension to them.
Well, okay, let's talk about how the images of hell then have drastically changed over time. And we do have cartoons here that show how commercial culture is now soft pedaling and making this a change. What are we to make, Will, of the changing tastes for hell?
It's not up to us to define what that is. So even the question, literal, metaphorical, I think Father Tom and I would agree that it is that state of being separate from God. Even those of us who believe in the triumph of grace and justice over all that is broken would probably say that it is quite legitimate to use art and poetry to define those things that go beyond words.
And Protestants take a lot of freedom with this, but Father Tom, Catholics, you have a unified view. You're not like us. We're all going off in our own opinions.
To a certain degree, yes, we have the teaching of the Catechism of the Catholic Church.
Yeah, what is it?
And a very important teaching that was expounding on the Catechism of the Catholic Church was a series of homilies or reflections given by Pope John Paul II in 1999, before the Great Jubilee, a series on heaven, a series on hell, a series on purgatory. And in that series on hell particularly, separation, alienation, the free choosing of mortal sin and staying in a state of mortal sin, of not choosing to be reconciled and building bridges with God, of making a decision that I don't want to be with God, I don't want to be with others. That being said, the Roman Catholic Church has never taught that someone is in hell. There's not a list that we consult on the internet of the occupants of hell. Some lay people may have those ideas and others may have those ideas, but I can assure you, but the Church has taught who's in heaven. Through the doctrine of the saints.
Okay, so what happens if we make a final, ultimate decision to grasp onto these things of sin other than of God? What if we say, we irrevocably reject you, God? We're just not going there.
To me, it goes back to the cross. And for a person to cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" is a statement of one in hell. That
Which
wasn't
Jesus cried out.
Exactly. That wasn't the end of the story. And because of that, I think that I'm not entirely sure that when we stand at the end of our days in the presence of God, that any one of us would turn away from grace.
Father Tom?
The teaching of hell was never meant to scare, frighten, or terrorize, but it was meant to take soberly and seriously the call to heaven and the journey to heaven. And yet, in that free will that's in each of us, Augustine teaches it, other teachers teach the same point, people can say no. People can choose. I find that hard to believe how somebody could do that, but it's possible.
The New Testament teaching is that it is Jesus you have to say yes to. Is that what it's limited to?
And he too was the one who said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." This goes to a much bigger conversation about inclusive versus exclusive
and so we
understandings.
still have to claim that gift from Christ.
Or Christ claims us.
All right, okay. Well, both of you, thank you very much. We're going to follow this up with a fascinating discussion on with Paul Young, author of The Shack, who now has a story coming up about hanging on and getting a chance to really consider your future with God or not. All right, thank you both. We'll be back after this.
And then hell is what happens when human beings say to the God in whose image they were made, "We don't want to worship you. We don't want our human life to be shaped by worshiping you. We don't want who we are as humans to be transformed by the love of Jesus dying and rising for us. We don't want any of that. We want to stay as we are and do our own thing." And if you do that, what you're saying is you want to stop being an image-bearing human being within this good world that God has made. And you are colluding with your own progressive dehumanization. And that is such a shocking and horrible thing that it's not surprising that, again, the biblical writers and others have used very vivid and terrifying language about it. But many people have again picked that up and said, this is a literal description of reality, and somewhere down there is a lake of fire, and it's got worms in it, and it's got serpents and demons, and they're out there coming to get you. And I think actually the reality is more sober and sad than that, which is this progressive shrinking of human life. And that happens during this life, but it seems to me if somebody resolutely says to God, I'm not going to worship you, and it's not just not coming to church, it's a matter of deep down somewhere there is a rejection of the good creator God, then that is the choice that humans make. In other words, I think human choices in this life really matter. We're not just playing a game of chess where tomorrow morning God will put the pieces back on the board and say, okay, that was just a game, now we're doing something different. The choices we make here really do matter. There's part of me that would love to be a universalist and say, it'll be all right, everyone will get there in the end. I actually think the choices we make in the present are more important than that.